So we're going to now walk through the frequently made mistakes for assignment number 2. All the comments that I gave should be pushed back into your repositories. If for some reason you don't see the comments, let me know. There were some people who didn't fill in certain things or didn't appear to push the right code. So if you had an email from me, please make sure you contact me if you have any questions. First of all, make sure your code compiles. A lot of people had code that didn't compile, so make sure your code compiles. That's part of the requirement for getting feedback. Please make sure you document your code line by line. People are still writing code and not documenting it. And a handful of people are removing the to-do tags, which makes it very complicated. Also, please make sure that you leave the to-do tags at the top of the code rather than at the bottom, because what I do, of course, is I search through your code to find the to-do tag so I can review it. So if you put it at the bottom, then it takes extra time to go back to the top. So let's start walking through the various parts of the comments I had. We'll start with the client side. The client side, of course, is the part that's adding additional capabilities to the parallel streams crawler. So make sure that you use a method reference instead of a Lambda expression. So this remains something that people still need to keep working on. Your IDE should give you a warning, or not a warning is the wrong word, but it gives you a hint that you can make the modifications. So make sure you pay attention to the comments that it's giving you back or the feedback it's giving you. And I'll note a couple other places where you should be using method references as opposed to Lambda expressions. Now we're in process page. Make sure that you don't create local variables, but instead stream everything together into one chain using the fluent interface pattern, just a cleaner way to write this type of code. Of course, make sure you comment it properly as well. And then let's move on to transform image remotely. A lot of people either didn't implement this code or implemented it very strangely. So make sure you think carefully about what it's trying to do. So it doesn't make any sense to call get remote data source if you don't store the results for that, and then make the result that comes back from get remote data source be what you call apply transforms using. And for some reason, this code is calling transform image locally here. I'm not quite sure what that's all about, but that code is incorrect. So think carefully about what needs to go on there. Clearly calling transform image locally completely misses the point of why we're making the remote call. The remote call, of course, is to call the method that's defined over on the server and get the results back after they're transformed remotely. So calling transform image locally after we've just gotten done transforming images remotely would make no sense. This code also doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't compile, and it's not documented properly, so please make sure that all those things are fixed. And especially the compiling part, you need to make sure you come to office hours if there's any questions about the code and why it's not compiling. This particular code is overly complicated. You don't need to create a new image crawler. If you think carefully about what is going on here with image crawler and what parallel streams crawler is a subclass of, that should give you a gigantic hint. And then also don't create a local list variable, but instead chain everything together using the fluent interface pattern, as we've talked about before. Here's yet some other problems. I don't think this code will compile. Calling get remote data source is going to return an object, and it's not going to return a stream, so you can't call map on it, so you have to do something else. Think about what that does. And then once again, calling create image in this way isn't going to work. It's just syntactically incorrect. It's not even a method reference, but even if it was a method reference, it wouldn't work because it doesn't fit the characteristics of how you could use a method reference in this context. So make sure that your code is compiling. Once again, if you have any problems, make sure you come to office hours. We have plenty of office hours all week. Now let's switch over to the server side. So now we're going to see some other common problems. Make sure that you use the right parameter type or the right annotation for multi-part file. It's not request param. It's something very similar to request param, but it's not request param. So if you take a look and see what else there might be available that deals with parts, that will help you, or a part, that will give you a big hint. Again, there's no request parts with a plural, so that's not correct. Let's see, this implementation of apply transforms doesn't work properly. It doesn't match what's described in the specification above, so it's not going to work. Let's take a look at some other problems with apply transforms. once again, please make sure you document your code line by line. And that's a good way to figure out what you're doing. Take a look at what the specification says and then see if that's what you're actually doing when you make the calls. So please make sure to use method reference here instead of a Lambda expression. This should be kind of familiar to you by now. Your IDE should give you a hint to do that. You don't want to just provide a filter with nothing in it. You need a predicate for a filter, so something is obviously missing there. And then likewise, calling post for entity doesn't make any sense because that's not something that's meant to be called in a stream. So that's not going to work properly. I don't think it'll compile. And likewise, speaking of not compiling, this code won't compile since it uses the wrong terminal operator. There is no toList terminal operator. toList is a factor method that's used in the context of the collect terminal operator. So make sure you use that. And these should be things that we've covered quite a bit at this point, and you've gotten a chance to see lots of examples of using terminal operators like collect. This particular implementation of post request is not going to compile because there was no parameter named info. I'm not sure where that came from. But even if it was fixed to be correct, which it's not, there's something that's missing here. And what you need to do is after you post for entity, you need to get the body that comes back from that, which will then be the transformed image. Because what gets back from post for entity, I believe, is a response entity, which is not the same thing as a transformed image. So I'm not sure, a lot of people had that mistake. I'm not sure how your code was even compiling, but you need to get the body in order to get that back the image that you want, the transformed image. This code is just simply bizarre. It's going to end up calling itself recursively infinitely, so you have infinite recursion, which is obviously not what's expected there. So again, make sure you're running the tests. I can't believe that this possibly could have passed the tests. This implementation of get transform microservices actually needs to get the list of microservices, and discovery client is not an object, I believe, that you can stream. It's not a collection, for example. So this code probably wouldn't compile either, so make sure you're compiling your code. Now we're moving over into the microservices side of the house, and this implementation of apply transform is missing something very important. Please take a look at the comment there to see what you should be doing. There's a similar thing that you probably had done for the main controller, so you have to make sure you're doing the same thing for the microservices controller. And again, this is the wrong annotation. It's not request param. It's something else. Very similar in name, but it's not request param. And then down here, this is just a minor point, but it's a good habit to get into, not creating a local variable whose only purpose is then to be returned on the next line. So you're much better off just saying return new transformed image as opposed to creating a local variable called image of type transformed image and then returning that on the next line. Just a good habit to get into, not making the code more verbose than it needs to be. Okay, so that is the end of the summary of frequently made mistakes for assignment number 2.